Have a good one. Disability too far. Yes, have a good day.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
Content over everything! Yeah, it's definitely a cultural thing, but what is it in the culture that does it? Because, I mean, if we're making a point about the difference between Africans and Caribbeans, for example, you know, I mean, if you go to certain areas where, take my friend, for example, he's from Elephant and Castle, he comes from a very strict Nigerian background, but he took on the Caribbean culture that was dominant in the area, and that made him perform differently, you could say, right? What is that? Would you think? I mean,
well, when you talk about people groups, right? You're looking at within a particular people group, different segments of attitude. So I don't know so when you say he performed differently, did he perform better or worse?
No, my point is that he would perform differently than an African who would come here to study. He grew up here from a very young age, and thus he doesn't really have the African work ethic that many of the foreign students would have, or something. I don't know. The point is that he's more of a Londoner, but there's something in the London culture, or the culture that he's identified with, that has made him perform differently or something.
So you say some type of cultural gap?
Well, that's what we're saying. It must be culture. But what is it in the culture that made him perform like that? What's the detriment in the culture that maybe there's a less, I don't know, what is it?
Well,
because it can't be the legacy of racism.
Well, many things are connected to the legacy of racism, but we just have to identify, right?
But I mean, if you said that it wasn't that made the African migrant students perform differently, they aren't affected as affected as the legacy of racism.
The irony of that comment is the reason why those migrants are actually coming here is because of
that's
the
a separate point. I'm with you on that.
But I'm saying it connects everything. It's a huge thing, right?
Right, but I mean, just looking at the difference between the two, they may suffer from the legacy of racism, but one suffers more apparently.
Yeah. Well,
right?
Okay, so if you look at like say West African people and West Indian Caribbean people,
sure.
right? The history is the Caribbean people were closer to the oppression, meaning the people were taken from West Africa,
sure,
and put into the West Indies, and then they were closer to that kind of detriment. Yeah. So the legacy of the culture from that is going to represent the people. Okay. So that's why Nigerians are so much more closer to the Nigerian culture, because the Caribbeans had to form new cultures because they forgot the traditional culture that they had in West Africa.
Right. See? Fair enough.
And that's what it is. So that's why when they come back, you'll see
the increased legacy of racism in the Caribbean culture that might make that African kid of the African family who identifies with that culture perform worse than his fellow African migrant students.
Well, it depends. So when you come across an Afro-Caribbean community, there's different sections. So you have, for example, you have a Rasta community that is very different, right? Yeah, and the Rasta community is a lot of them are pretty much about learning how to plant, learning how to fend for yourself. Right, a very different cultural idea. Then you have like the ones who are more closer to like the economics. They dress in a certain way. They back in the old days in the Caribbean, you couldn't get on TV if you didn't speak a certain kind of English. Yeah, and they were subscribed to that. And then you had maybe the others where it was like more individualism and having their own way of thinking. So maybe that way, it might be that the Nigerian gentleman you're talking about went to. But had he become a Rasta or the traditional English speaking, his grades would have been different because those different groups have different legacies.
Possibly, but there is there's clearly a shared culture in many of the communities in the UK, which would produce maybe an affinity to crime. You get me?
Well,
and I don't know what aspect of the Caribbean culture.
Well, I can tell you.
But anyone who identifies with it seems to be more happy with crime.
Well, before you get to you've hit the full stop, right? And that's the ending. But the beginning of that is literally what has this community gone through.
No, I get that.
Yeah,
I do.
to make crime a better option. Yeah?
I do get that. I get that, and
but the
I'm
thing is,
with
when
you.
we say this,
it's not accurate enough.
But the thing is, when we say this, we're excluding, the Sunday morning church mother. and the IT Caribbean. We're
Of course, because
them.
they aren't falling into this. What we're talking about.
Well,
We're talking about those who identify fully with.
So what we're saying is crime culture.
Could be, yeah. That's one of the elements that might make someone perform detrimentally.
Yeah, and the sad thing with crime, the sad thing with crime culture is, do you need help? You okay? Do you need help? Okay. Yeah, the issue with crime culture is it doesn't discriminate once you're within it. So there is not just people from a certain background.
100%.
Right? And if we see an overrepresentation in one particular area group, people group, then you should suspect that particular people group has gone through the most amount of mistreatment. That's why that option is there. So if you go to Poland, go to Poland, right? And then you're gonna, because Poland is just made up of Polish people generally, right? You're gonna see crime and non-crime, right? But you have to look at the story of the particular people who do the crime, and you're going to see a similarity between them and many of the people here do crime. It just so happens that the people who do crime here might actually be more of a identifiable people group because of their hair, their colour, whatever it is.
Sure.
But when you look at the experience of the people in Poland doing the crime and the experiences of the people in London doing the crime, same. Go to Scotland, they share the same thing. I know. So I've seen. So
the experiences might be the same, but the manifestation of the experience isn't
No,
the same.
but also
because we're talking
documentation,
about
though.
a qualitatively different manifestation of crime, where some people have never done crime in their life, but they're happy to sell records about it, and that doesn't happen in Poland and other parts. I mean, we're talking about a real glorification of criminal lifestyle, and that comes from somewhere. I don't know where it comes from. It might be the Western individualism.
I suspect you're hitting on hip hop at the moment, but
yeah, it's a big issue.
But I listen to country.
Sells millions.
I listen to country and Western music.
I don't know why.
It's really good. Yeah,
I'm joking.
Yeah, and in these songs they talk about killing their wives, and all sorts.
We both know.
I'm telling you, this is what I've got these albums with.
We both know that there's not another genre which you can closely correlate to actual crime in actual areas where the actual artists come from. There's no other genre.
Well, no, because
it clearly is a glorification
I listen
of
to country
the
Western.
poorest.
And they talk about bank robberies, they talk about killing their wives, they talk about being alcoholics. Yeah, but the difference is the community that.
You know it's different.
I hear my point, then say it's different, right? The difference is how we react to information, right? So there's certain kind of people groups. For example, if a country and Western artist made a song saying, I'm shooting you, I'm shooting him, I'm shooting her, it will be treated more. Well, you said you don't like country Western. I'll give you some records. Give me your number, right? Yeah, but. The difference is that the consumers of that, they don't literally put that down to them being European or whatever it might be.
I wouldn't do that.
Right?
It's a culture thing, isn't it?
Or even a culture thing. I put that to being a redneck or whatever it might be, right?
Right.
It's an appreciation of the art form. But I think with hip hop, we appreciate the art form, but at the same time, it's like, it's real life. And it's real.
Because that would be true if your first point was true. I just don't believe that country music violence is linked back to the communities where this violence happens in such a widespread manner.
Yeah, I guess the thing with hip hop is there's a emphasis on realness,
reality,
being
it's the
real,
only genre where
being
reality
real,
sells more.
And there is
There's a reason for that.
There's also the line where it blurs, where reality and music are not separated. To the point where
I don't think you find that in
the
other
stuff
genres.
you're talking about has implications. So then it's that kind of blurry line. But it's I guess for me, the point about culture is important. And then another thing is, when we talk about disparities or being overrepresented in this area, it doesn't necessarily constitute an institutional or a racist thing, right? And there was a period where I believed that it must be. The fact that, okay, black men are X number of times more likely to be sectioned or diagnosed with a serious mental health condition, I'm thinking, it must be racism.
Do you think that's part of it?
It could be. I mean, people self-report that it's racism, but
It's also dependent on socio-economic status as well.
Sorry?
Socio-economic status.
so if you're in poverty, then the chances of you experiencing those conditions are
100%.
more likely. But the cultural aspects of it is relevant because we're talking about ideas, especially the religious ideas about mental health. Like pray away, man up. So if those ideas exist culturally, then the likelihood of you seeking treatment is probably going to be lower.
Wow.
And then what does that mean? it means that something that could have been managed at a lower level is going to have to be addressed when it hits a crisis point. And so we have to look at these topics with a microscope, try and unpack it, because as someone that's experienced it, going through it changed my perspective, right? Because when I looked at the data, I'm thinking, yo, this, like, they're either misdiagnosing or, you know, it has to be racism, something. But
It's like culture misunderstanding as well.
in terms of what's being misunderstood?
Basically, if somebody, you know, it's like hyperactive and all that.
Yeah.
Because in certain cultures and all that, they tend to, you know, be more active and all that.
Okay,
They
yeah.
tend to, you know, use more hand gestures.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely certain groups of people can talk in an animated manner or can be perceived as being aggressive when they're just having a passionate conversation, right? But I think the point still stands in terms of the effect that culture has on mental health, crime, education, all of these different things, the complexities of the conversation. We have to try and look at it from a 360-degree perspective. Racism may form a factor, but it's hard to pinpoint. Like you're gonna have to give me an example of this thing.
I already said the legacy of racism has its hands in many pies, and it's just like how are you going to react to that reality, right? So I have strategy.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you think it's less racist today, or is it?
Come closer.
Is that less racist today in comparison to 20 years ago?
I think when you talk about racism, I think racism has a way of redefining itself. So the type of racism we would experience back in the day will not be the same as today, but it will be more covert.
So,
Definitely covert. You know, and there's conversations going on behind doors, like we were talking before, like, you know.
Dinner party racism.
Say again?
Dinner party racism.
Dinner party racism, that's a very specific scenario.
Well, explain what that means.
Like, you know, chatting shit behind people's back in a racial manner, behind closed doors, like in a dinner party environment.
Well, because you're on camera, come a bit closer with it.
In a dinner party environment, like basically talking badly towards somebody in a
Right.
racial role.
So when we have to talk about racism, we can talk about one thing where someone's saying horrible things towards people, right?
Yes.
I think the type we're talking about is having power and influencing people because you have power.
Yes, but I understand, yes, some people say, racism is power and prejudice.
Yeah.
That's the redefinition of
Some
racism.
people say that, yeah. Very modern.
But isn't that like, is it an old definition of that?
No, that's a new definition.
So if somebody says, okay, like somebody is supposedly, you know, somebody who's non-white.
Yeah,
and
they
he's
can't be
prejudiced, and he's
racist. That's why I don't buy that, bro.
And he's prejudiced. He doesn't have the power as well. But because he has that element of a characteristic,
I'll never get that.
Yes.
that person considered racist, partially racist.
So here's what it is. Historically, I would always agree with that comment that it's a prejudice plus power.
Yes.
But I realise that makes black people talk in circles. So what I say is, what's more valuable to me is the level of racism, right? So you could say that both acts are racist, but I say that one has a distinctive, more far-reaching effect, and that's what matters. Does that make sense? So, you know,
Well, both matter. But one matters more, or one has
both
more
matter
effect.
as a principle, but as a realism that we're going through, you know, it's not like for like. So we
No, definitely not like for like, but they both have their effects.
They both have their effects. But what I'm saying is, you know,
I mean, either can lead to death.
well,
Either can lead to attack. Either can lead to persecution in some sort. I mean, it can.
well, yeah, but the difference is the defense mechanism for them is very different. So, for example,
Sure,
if
it's
you
very different.
So, if you find some, let's say black person who attacks a non-black person,
This is what he's listening to.
Yeah.
Welcome to the discussion we're talking about.
we're talking.
Sorry, don't mean to stop.
You go. No. What we're saying is, I forgot what I was saying, but if you find a black person who attacks a non-black person for racism, yeah, well, that non-black person probably has a better defense mechanism in the system to actually get justice,
Right.
not vice versa. Not vice versa.
That's a legal point, isn't it? I mean, that's a fair point. It's a legal one. But if we're talking about racism,
Well, that is part of racism, isn't it?
No, yeah, and I don't disagree. But if we're talking about what racism is, what forms it takes, it doesn't take away from the fact that they are types of racism.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean that's the
But
thing.
I
Because
don't like
that
being circumcised.
definition is used to
Yeah.
to basically limit racism.
But yeah, but what I'm saying is, for a certain point, I think that's part of the distraction. I think if you're trying to have a solution for racism, and then we start talking about what is racism, but I'm saying we understand the effects of racism and who holds the power collectively, right? So because of that reality, that's where I come from. You had a question, sir?
So seeing somebody who's, let's just say, for instance, a year ago there was like an incident. I think a year or two ago, there was an incident in Chicago.
Right.
It was like
they kidnapped.
Yeah, kidnapped somebody
Yeah.
and they tortured a kid and all that.
Right.
Are those, for the reference race as well? Are those all those people who basically were perpetuating the crime? Are they racist?
Okay, so just so I understand, what was the people group of the kidnappers, and what was the purpose behind who they were kidnapping?
I think they were described as African American.
So you had African American people kidnapping who? And then and what they saying about?
Reference, I think literally reference politics and racism.
So they were showing race-based bias when they were
Yes.
kidnapping that individual.
Yeah, and politics.
Now, was there a motivation behind the kidnapping?
Well, yes, I think one of them were used to the same school.
With the same school?
They went to the same school. But I think, the reference, when they were assaulting him, the reference race.
Right. But what was the context behind race? Is it like?
I think it's more political.
So, but there must be a purpose behind. So it's like if I'm going to kidnap this gentleman, right? Yeah, because he might be of mixed heritage, I have to have a history of hatred or love for a person of mixed heritage that's politically connected to something for why I do it. Unless I'm, of course, a random killer, like a serial killer. It's like, today I'm going to kill you. Do you know what I mean? I'll beat you up. So once we understand the reason behind it, we can have a conversation. Yeah, but yes, we can all agree it's wrong to mistreat anyone based upon race.
But from what annoys me, because when people bring up that black people can't be racist, that in itself is a distraction. It's like, listen, bottom line, and it's also for me when they say we can't have, then it's someone saying that we don't have power or we can't get to the position to have power to be racist. I'm like, as you said, wrong is wrong, right? And there are levels.
I mean, do you know that guy who ruled Uganda? He was racist.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was.
Who, Idi Amin?
Yes.
So the guy who did what?
Of course it was.
The guy who
That shouldn't even
ruled
be a
Uganda.
question.
Yeah.
He was racist, isn't it?
Idi
because
Amin?
his background doesn't exempt him.
Well, once again, you've made a statement. You made a statement,
Yes,
right?
the last king.
But the statement has a contextual history. So if I'm in, you have a person. As far as I remember him going to England and saying, "Okay, we need assistance with these things that you have started," right? And then England declining, and then the history of why people of Indian descent was in Uganda and had all the privileged positions was in itself a history of racism. So then he reacted and said, well, if you're going to put these people here and not support the nation as a whole, but still have connections with them, then they're going to go. Now, I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but it's the history of racism why that dynamic happened. You see what I'm saying? So I don't agree with it, but there is a context.
It's down to.
Does that make sense?
It certainly does, but it's down to the person whether they decide to then be racist about it or not.
Well, here's what it is, right? The reason why this is an important case is because you have people in South Africa or Zimbabwe who are trying to get he's trying to get land back, right? Now that could be conceived as racism because you're trying to get land back from the Boers, right?
It's not the same as Idi Amin though.
Well, it was a history of racism. Okay, I have to give you a connect. I forgot what it's called, but basically, there's many countries where you have minority rule.
Right.
As in the minority rule the government. So obviously, the minority are better off. In Uganda, Kenya, historically, Guyana, and these kind of places, is where people of Indian descent have been put in power, and they have ruled that way. And because of that,
They've clung on to power.
well, yeah, they clung to power, and they've had that keep going. Right? So because of that, you're going to get resentment. This also happens in Africa, right? So for example, in Liberia, when the Afro-Americans and Caribbeans went there, they ruled with the same mindset as the Europeans. As in, we're from Europe, we have a European way of doing it, so we're going to be the ruling elite. And that's why you had a rebellion. So you had black people rebelling against black people but that still was the legacy of racism because the Afro-Caribbeans and the Afro-Americans were using the model that they picked up from a racist system to rule in Africa.
Yeah, they were racist.
Yeah, but yeah. So it was discriminating based upon ethnicity or history experience with him.
Right, but that doesn't take away from it. I mean, like, if
Yeah, but it's wrong, mate. Wrong is wrong.
yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, I feel like because we're going into the depths and we're like, oh, eventually all racism comes from white people, then we can't blame them as bad. I don't know, bro. Like, if a Chinese person is racist and he sort of mimics the white racism, he's still a racist.
Yeah.
You get me? Like, it's his choice to do so.
Yes, but a deeper conversation is understanding the context of why someone does something.
Context only goes so far.
Well, excuse.
Well, it's like this. It's like this. If you go to, it's like you go to. There's a person who's born in a rich family. Yeah, you take him out, you strip him naked, you give him rags, you throw him in the street, and he doesn't know he's rich. He grows up with the criminals of the street, right?
Because he's not rich.
Yeah, well, he's not anymore. Yeah, but when we look at him, we could say that man's an evil person. But there's a context of why he done that. And if we want to actually fix the problem, we have to understand that there's someone stripping people, throwing them in harsh conditions, forcing them to ascend to become this kind of way.
Yeah.
And that's the bigger solution.
Forcing.
Context matters.
I'd like to ask.
I heard something similar. You know when I heard like the white people complaining about like knife crime and saying, oh, all these kids are so vicious, blah blah blah, they're stabbing each other, but then they're thinking of the reasons why they're doing it because of like drug trade and stuff like that, and the drug demand is so high because the white people like that. That's I think I heard when somebody said
Sadiq
that.
Khan said that.
Somebody
Surprisingly,
said that.
the
Sadiq
mayor
Khan.
of London said that.
Somebody said that. I think I heard.
Have a
that
Sadiq Khan or the
saying that, like these people will complain
commissioner
about
of
like
the
beating each other.
That's a big thing to say for an elected official. I'll
When
give
white
him that.
people are the mainly not white people, I'm talking
still
about
gonna
people
solve
who
it.
are taking drugs.
Middle class,
mostly
mostly,
takers.
right.
Most white people.
The native.
Supply and demand. They are the
sorry.
greatest demand, and thus
Exactly.
the supply grows.
What you say? What's your name,
It's not
brother?
going to solve Osman.
Osman.
Yeah, it's not going to solve anything. I remember watching a documentary on Channel 5. A lot of those drug dealers, they're average people.
Brother,
Average.
I think because you're saying a lot of sense, you want to come that close because you might actually affect people's realities, and because you've got such a nice soft voice, we're not going to pick you up.
A lot of those people who sell drugs,
Right.
they're average people.
Okay.
They just do it for extra money.
Right.
They've done it because, they went out with a drug dealer. They do that because, they want to make extra income.
Okay.
And do it for various reasons.
Right.
So who are the real drug dealers, if not them?
Who's importing the drugs into the country?
To be honest, yeah.
Yeah, who's importing the drugs in? Yeah, but that don't make these lot average.
Yes, but I think
You know
that-
what I'm saying?
I think a lot of those people.
But more average than the
Well,
person
I think
bringing it in,
yeah.
surely.
I think he means
They're more average.
I
Is that the way
think
you
a lot of
measure criminals? Or this
I
one's
mean-
more average than the
I
other?
mean, but average
Bro,
people,
they're
yeah.
all selling drugs, bro.
Yeah, I know.
Talking like,
Yeah,
I'm talking
that's
like,
it.
I'm talking
Someone bringing in
like
tons in it.
individuals of
Someone shot an ounce, someone shot a key.
Right.
who are,
But
who
them
are
ones
from-
are average, okay.
who, for the most part, who are
below
from our,
average.
economic class, working class, trying to make it with that, live in London, which is expensive, but like, they do that for extra income.
Yeah, I tune into one.
But like, I think a lot of people, perception was okay. A lot of those drug dealers who are like hard criminals, they're already in jail now.
Okay. So what? So I'm trying to understand the point you're saying. Can you sum up into a point? Just so I can understand.
I think basically I was listening to LBC a couple months ago,
Right.
and there was the police commissioner. She said that a lot of those crimes were perpetrated by drugs
I thought you could do it from YouTube.
Right.
Just like join.
and firearms and all that. Yeah, that's what she said. I was thinking to myself, okay, 10 years ago, I could, like she said, in certain areas of the capital, like South London, certain places North London, East London, like certain part of West London as well. She's saying that, and
but not to broad.
the crimes that have been committed due to drugs and all.
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, okay, I think 10 years ago there was more shootings, isn't it? There were more shootings 10 years ago. You would see like more police armed police operations, but you don't see armed police operations like in this day and age.
Well, I don't know about that. But what are you
Like
saying
car
that?
stops or like raids.
So you're saying that the drug epidemic's improving?
No, what I'm saying is, in terms of drug-related crime, like in terms of shootings and all that, it wasn't that like 10 years ago there was a lot of them in comparison to this current time.
Okay.
You know what? There was a period where the violent crimes were dropping. There was like a 3-4 year period, and then it started to go up again. But it's interesting because obviously we had the introduction of the austerity measures, and but crime was also dropping as well. So you're thinking, okay, now they're saying that the level of violent crimes is is the highest it's been for a while, and then we're trying to understand the reasons for it. Is it the cyclical nature of it? Is it the austerity? What's actually happening? Is it the social media fueling some of this discourse as well? It's
when you talk about crime rate, you're referring to we live in an unprecedented moment in history, because basically unprecedented moment in time. Okay, basically it's not just the crime rate. You got terrorism as well, human rights. You know, it's something that this country hasn't experienced like since the IRA. So we live in an unprecedented moment.
You know what? It's a weird period, and you asked the question about racism, and I guess I'm going to expand that into the kind of the general climate of things. Like these last few years, I don't know, like between the divisions caused by Brexit, Donald Trump, I feel like racial tensions are more pronounced than they've been. I feel more aware of my.
Can I quickly just comment on that? Because I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I don't necessarily agree with the fact that racial tensions are a lot more pronounced or even worse than they were X, Y, and Z. Personally, it's one of those things where you have to take a step back and have a look at the bigger picture. And for me personally, when I see all of these far-right rallies and all of these, questionable rallies that they talk about, right? And they often take these pictures that make it look like the streets are flooded with people or thing, right? And then if you compare it to yesterday's rally, right, which was the pro-Brexit rally, there was 700,000 people.
It wasn't pro-Brexit.
No, sorry, Remain, right? That's 700,000. And it's the same with the Trump thing as well, anti-Trump rally. There was an anti-Trump one, right? That was 250,000. Right?
Wow.
But whenever you see these people, right, they make it seem like it's massive news, it's big news, and they'll zoom in the picture, right, in a really small quarter street, and make it seem like dozens of people, thousands of people are there. And the truth is, it's only 100 to 150. So right now, it seems like the media seems to be disproportionately focusing on a very small lot of people to give us this idea that racial tensions are a lot worse than they used to be. For me personally, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. No,
go ahead.
No,
but outside of the media, there are objective statistical ways of seeing
definitely.
how there are shifts. Bro, just look at British politics. British politics, it has to play to the far right because it knows of the growing power of it.
Not even just that, the hate crime as well, how much they've risen.
Yeah, I saw that recently.
275%, so definitely.
The thing is though, there is like a buffer to this because you're right, I mean there seems to be racial tensions getting worse every time, yeah, but at the same time you see another movement that's going from strength to strength, which is sort of loosely called the SJW movement, liberal movement. Here's one. And there's loads of these lot. These lot, like, I don't know, most of them are young, to be fair, but these lot hate racism in all their forms. I don't really like them a lot.
What's the SJ? Sorry, for people who don't know.
Social justice.
Oh,
warrior. You know what I mean? That's one term. They might not like that term.
Okay.
What's up,
in fact, so since you're a professed social identitarian, I've got this scenario for you, right?
Yeah.
So in the United States, Harvard is being sued by, I guess, lawyers representing the East Asian community because they have to score higher in the SATs to get into Harvard, right? And so that's a form of discrimination based on their race.
Yeah.
And so their intention is to help other minorities, but at what cause? At what cost?
I think the question for them, especially the East Asian community, because they know their history is not as harsh as the African American history. They like to play around as if their history is even somehow like co-linked or whatever, but it's not. And when they had the first chance of disowning themselves as minorities, they did. A lot of the times, I think it was during the 60s or the 70s, Asian Americans would class themselves as white Americans over actually being called Asian Americans. Just so that
the legacy of racism,
yeah.
you could say.
And this was to get into better schools, and this was to get into better healthcare systems, etc. So the thing is, in terms of when we're talking about the American society, certain groups have been given privileges way before other groups, right? So this idea of supposedly them having to score higher, and I think I've heard about this. This is to do with the whole affirmative action. That's it, the affirmative action. So they can play like race. Say that again?
This is the opposite of affirmative action. This is punishing people because of their race. Because you're Asian, you have to score higher.
Can you give me the context behind it?
So Americans have to sit the SATs, right? The benchmark, let's say the benchmark is 1600. If you're Asian, you're gonna have to score 400 points more.
But where does this come from?
This comes from the college itself setting their policy, their
This is an
admission.
actual policy set by the
That's why they're getting sued.
Yeah.
That's why they're being sued.
They have to score more than whites as well.
Asian applicants
Sorry?
have to
East
score
Asian
higher
applicants have to
get
score
in
higher
because
to get more
Asians
because
usually
they
have
are
higher
doing so well. Exactly. Because they're doing so well, they're being punished
Trying to slow them down.
based on their race.
No, because if they applied the same standards to East Asians,
They would
Harvard
flood
just be full
it.
of
Exactly.
East
So,
Asians.
but then that's in their attempt to engineer society. You're trying to help one community, but at the cost of
the other community.
the other community.
The reason I asked in particular the context behind it is because we've had various cases like this before, especially when it comes to affirmative action. We've had American native students who've basically taken their university to court to sue them, saying that they have to work 10 times as harder, whereas someone can get an average grade. That's why I asked for the context.
Wow,
if you're now saying that the college itself has officially said word for word that Asian Americans or Asians in general have to get a high score, then I can't argue with that. The court of law shows that's discrimination. Straight up, it shouldn't even be that long of a case. It'll probably be straightforward and it will go forward with it. So I can't really argue with that. But I'd have to specify and I'd have to really pronunciate that the college would have to have said it, because we have various cases where it's been implied and people have taken their universities to courts with these implied supposed standards and policies, and they failed. So that's why I asked specifically whether or not the university had said it.
I think this is disguised because basically, when you look at the Trump administration, basically, just Lee Peterson.
Yeah.
When you talk about him, how he describes about Trump's administration, the guy said Trump is the great white hope.
Yeah. It does.
So when you refer it to,
that's
when you think about it, and you take into account his position in terms of affirmative action, certain stuff here that could affect minorities and things. I think the Donald Trump administration, I think Hispanics and black people, they're going to be a lot worse off on the administration.
The opposite.
They're going to be a lot worse off. Because when it comes to
it's complicated.
when it comes to
So am I not able to manage?
there's a government agency that helps out minorities when it comes to business ownership and all that.
So are you saying that with Trump in power, blacks are worse or
They're
best?
going to be the worst off than Obama.
Yeah, but with Trump.
Obviously going to try.
Yeah.
They just announced that the black unemployment is the lowest it's been in.
Yeah, no, but it's a trend. It's like he's taking credit on something like that. Obama actually put something in place. When it comes to giving credit on that, just give him credit on the fact that he hasn't fucked it up yet. Because he could fuck it up.
Who's that?
Donald Trump. He could fuck up the.
I mean, getting rid of Obama healthcare, to be honest, is probably one of the biggest fuck ups that
Tell
you
me,
can do.
tell me what you know about Obama healthcare.
The Obama healthcare,
Yeah.
supposedly it was supposedly trying to emulate what we have over here
No,
with the
it wasn't.
NHS. It was supposedly
wasn't.
trying to make
It
it
wasn't.
more.
I'll tell you
Tell me what it was.
Obama healthcare is. Written by the corporations, healthcare and insurance companies. Obama had nothing to do with it. This is what they put forward. And the reason was for it to earn more money for the drugs companies and the insurance companies.
You've just told me about the economics behind it. You haven't told me about the
That's what it's
practice.
all about. So what it is, there's say there's 10 of us here.
Yeah.
6 of us can actually afford through our normal employment to pay for health insurance. 4 can't. Rather than going to these companies and saying bring the cost down so that all 10 of us can afford it, the insurance companies goes to Obama and wrote the policy for him to tax the 6 of us who can afford it, penalise us, so we can then pay for the 4 that can't. So the insurance companies and the insurance company can earn more money.
So how does that take
That's
away?
certain
Give me 2
states,
seconds.
right?
How does that take away from the fact that I just said that it makes it more affordable for the average American?
Yeah, look,
I was going to get to it. Do you want to?
No.
I was going
To
to
make
get
it
to I was gonna
affordable,
get-
you bring the price
So,
down. You
when
bring
we're
the
talking
price
about-
up, it doesn't make it more affordable.
When we're
I
talking
think the
about
objective of Obamacare was to make it affordable for every American, irrespective of
That's not a
class.
term it. But it was to
However, you
penalise
have-
the people who could have.
in respect,
However, you have
talk
certain-
about
you have certain
the
states,
economy,
okay.
the economics behind it,
But
right?
what do you think governs it?
Now-
If it was 10 pence a week, everybody could have it.
Now
So
the question is,
economics that governs it?
You have
right?
that
The
certain
question
states
is,
in the South.
Sorry,
okay?
what are you saying?
give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
The question is, in an American society, right? Can you objectively prove that everyone who was born in that society has a fair shot at gaining an equal earning opportunity?
Well, that's not what you're talking about earnings.
No. But you're
But
talking
I'm
about
talking
people
about
who can. You were
no,
talking
no.
about.
All right,
Give me 2
let me-
seconds. 2 seconds. Let me finish.
You asked a
You were
question, you
talking
want me
about.
to answer it.
Okay, answer the question.
Right. What I'm saying to you is, in America, the healthcare costs more than it costs in Germany, France, and Britain, and Canada as a far superior system, because the healthcare system is there geared to making the drugs company and the health insurance companies money. Nothing else.
We know
The
this.
corporations write the policies. If they want a policy where everybody can have healthcare, bring in the Canadian, French, German, or British system, which costs a lot less money.
Where do you think this is different in anywhere in the world? All medical healthcare is based around pharmaceutical companies. Where in the world?
So why do we have a system? All right, Canada, America.
Canada's similar to here.
Just taking those two countries. America mostly makes the drugs. Canada buys it cheaper than America. Canadian companies are selling it back into America cheaper than they could buy it in America. Because the American companies tied up with the insurance companies know what they can sell it for. It's a con.
Deep.
And Obama, it's not his fault because he was paid, the $1 billion it cost to put him in power were paid for the banks and the corporations. So they get back.
Let me put it to you though. I mean, I'm not a fan of corporations have any influence in policy, right, or legislation. But the thing is, if they propose a policy which does make it makes it more affordable for everyone.
It doesn't make it affordable.
But you said that
Everybody can have it.
6 might be taxed more for the 4 to have
Yes,
it
sir.
cheaper.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case and people have a better quality of life, there might not be a problem with it. I mean, look, don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect policy, but in this country, for example, like the NHS could potentially be privatized for more efficiency and remain free. You get me? You can. Yes, you can. Look, man, NHS privatized as it is, bro, and it still remains free, and it could be further privatized
once you've
and
got
remain free.
Once
But my
you've got
point is that
shareholders to pay dividends, things change a lot. That's when the neoliberalism came into this country, and we now have nothing that generates money, like electricity board, gas board, water board. It's all privately owned. I mean,
yes, I know. Look, I'm with you. But my point is just for the man on the ground, the man and woman on the ground, if they enjoy a better quality of life, because the insurance and healthcare providers might have done some mad deal in the back.
Right, but what I'm saying to you,
I don't like it.
But America already pays more for their healthcare than any other country in the world. So why not use that money that they're paying to bring everybody else?
I'm with that.
Because it's not in the
better.
corporation's interest.
Right, I see what you mean, but I mean, if Obama was well-meaning and he wasn't just there to coldly give the companies more money, and he did actually try to make it more affordable for the 4,
that would be good. I mean, they talk about the single-payer system they have in Canada. They've only got to cross the border to see and have a look at the system.
I know.
They're not interested in it.
I know.
Because it means less money for the corporations.
Definitely. There's no doubt about it.
And one other thing they start up in America is they call it the revolving door. So you got a guy that works for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. He will spend 2 years there, then he'll go work for this corporation over here.
It's disgusting.
Then he's back in there. So when they want something, they've got a man inside to set it up.
Do you think for some people, I guess,
Be off, bro. See you guys later.
Take care.
the fact that Obama, first black president, like it reduced the scrutiny that was given to him, because it's like, okay, this is a momentous occasion.
He got a lot of hate.
Got a lot of hate. But I'm saying for certain people, I guess what I'm saying is the fact that Obama, first black president, do you feel that some people would not have scrutinized him as much because it was such a symbolic moment? Obviously, of course, there's some people that are going to be against him, but for other people, perhaps they will not being as objective or giving him certain leeway.
Right.
And I guess
in the black community, yes.
Yeah.
I would say
the reason why is because they're saying that he basically done more for the LGBT community.
That is the truth. That's a brilliant truth.
I mean, again, you guys.
Scrutiny is okay. I think the vast majority of Americans, they don't like Obama because, first of all,
Who doesn't say?
the vast majority of European Americans don't like Obama because they think that Obama has, destroyed or eroded race relations in the United States. Personally, how I see it is, I think beginning of 2007, when he was campaigning, I I think the racial element, okay, came out. And you look at statistics and all that in terms of hate crimes, hate groups increasing, from 2007 all the way up until now, okay. And you take that into consideration, and you take into consideration the fact that it's a country that is that is thoroughly multicultural than like 30 years ago. 30 years ago, when you watch MTV and all that, the only black people you can see is either Rockwell.
What, the Michael Jackson Rockwell?
Yeah,
Well, Michael Jackson wasn't
Michael
allowed on it
Jackson.
when he first started.
And certain.
Well, the first MTV, there was a Black Music Award where it was Michael Jackson, Prince, Lionel Richie,
Yes.
and I think
those
Prince
were the
won.
only black people that were on MTV. But now, when you fast forward it now, it's thoroughly multicultural.
Right.
It's thoroughly multicultural. And and basically when you take into account, right, that someone 7 years old, 8 years old, he watches Fox News, he watches certain conservative media that deliberately mislead him. Not only is he easily misled, he's cognitively challenged. He's deeply prejudiced, and because he's prejudiced, he takes everything on face value.
Yeah. But then,
And when you think about, in his mind as well, okay, if you're conservative, you're pro-white.
if you're
If
what?
you're conservative, he thinks that if you're conservative, you're pro-white. But if you're liberal, you're anti.
If you're what? Liberal.
In their mindset. For those who watch Fox News and Tucker Carlson,
Here's how I see it, right? Many people groups have a genuine concern about them actually losing like their liberties and justice and stuff, right? But what I see is sometimes people have such a far advantage that to go from having 3 to having 2 is an outrage because they're used to 3, but they're not aware of the person who had half of 1. You see what I'm saying? And they don't seem to care about the history of how they end up with 3 while others had half of 1. And I think that type of community you're talking about, that a lot of them are that kind of way.
Yes. So for instance, it's like giving somebody who's 240 pounds, food that is like worth at least 1,800 calories, and you give the person like me 1,800 calories. I'll be okay with 1,800 calories.
Right.
The guy with 240 pounds, okay, he's not going to be okay because
Yeah.
it's going to be a pressure for him.
Yeah.
Because he's in that because of the calorie deficiency,
Yeah.
makes him, like oppressed, basically. The calorie deficiency is a representation of oppression called due to his overweight.
Yeah, I hear that. But I think the question that you asked was, do we feel that black people were not as critical as Obama? Am I correct?
Yeah.
And what I would say is, I haven't seen one policy that Obama passed that was directly for black people. But the reason why I would put that down to is I never saw black people in America coming together to try to get policies changed on a collective level.
You had Al Sharpton. He was going to the White House for a black agenda, working on a black agenda.
Okay. Well, I wasn't.
But didn't Obama live the black experience so that he would be able to know what would be beneficial to the black people?
But the issue.
Firstly, before you answer, I realise that he's selected by all the people in America, so he can't just concentrate on black issues. But if he led the black experience, he would know some of the things.
Obama went to Kenya, right? And Obama went to Kenya and he spoke about LGBT rights,
And
right?
Jamaica.
And Jamaica, right?
And
Now,
another
but
Ethiopia.
that was enforced by his LGBT backing community. Yeah. So what I'm saying is they came together, they put a package together, a surplus pack, whatever it's called, gave it to Obama. So now their voice is being heard. African Americans can do the same thing, have an agenda, put a pack together, and give it to.
I think a lot of people assume that he lived that experience, he would know something about black people.
Well,
I don't think he lived in a so-called black experience.
Chicago?
Me personally,
but when it comes to when it comes to the life stage,
Yeah.
he hasn't lived there as much as somebody who's 50 years old and he's black. And he didn't live in Hawaii. He lived in New York City.
Obama's a politician, right? And he's going to play the politician's game, right? And you don't get into power just by being a nice person, right? There's so many things behind the scenes. So we understand that, but community groups come together to fund your campaign, right? The drugs company and so forth. You have to pay back in some way. They're not doing it because they're nice people, right? But I think if you want to ask me what was a good thing about Obama, is I think he was a symbolic victory. So little children can see that you can
You
get
can
to power.
achieve, you can
He was a black man, he married a black woman, so that shows that there is a black love at a higher
But
place.
do you think if he married a white woman, do you think he would actually, do you think he would won the presidency?
I think it would be even more harder on him to some. I think he could still get in,
Yes.
but I think he wouldn't have necessarily got the same amount of support from the African American community.
Yes. But I think like when you talk about African American community, talk about, you know, he might get the support of the liberal, you know, African Americans who are liberal, but he's not going to get the support of African Americans who are, you know, let's just say, you know, who are pretty much anti-integration, you know, don't want to, you know, the type of African Americans that say, you know,
Well, as you were saying earlier,
the type of, you know,
It's the shifting
you listen to
vote.
you listen to Louis Farrakhan and, you know, those type of black people. They're not going to vote for him if he marries a white woman.
Of course, no.
but
Because even if-
they'll be voting Republicans.
Yes.
It's the bit in the middle that is.
Even if he's an Israelite, they wouldn't. They're strongly against interracial marriage.
But they won't vote for him anyway.
Yes.
The Israelites they're anti-government, so it represents a system that they're trying to dismantle.
Yes.
So they won't vote for anyone.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. Strategically, him being of African American would have upset the southern crowd least, and the African Americans would have something to aspire to.
Do you wait? Because that, you know what? I remember 2007 Obama campaign. The change shirt, I had it, felt powerful, felt inspired. Do we think that, I guess 10, 11 years on, that there's more racial polarization
It's against the law, bro.
than at that symbolic point?
I think Obama's presidency was it flipped a switch on certain groups of people in the United States. And when you look at, you know, when you look at certain areas of the United States, you specifically talking like areas like, you know, so-called liberal areas, you know, who are perceived as liberal areas, weren't so liberal because, you know, they had okay. I think from the age, I think prior to Obama presidency, there was some form of, you know, post-racial society. You know, it was the intro of post-racial society. You know, around George Bush year, you know, Bill Clinton, you know, around that time period.
You guys have too much. Give too much credibility to the American political system.
Yes.
Firstly, the way you're talking, you know, left and right, there's only one party in America.
Yes.
But they have the illusion of two parties, so that people would vote and go through this process. But there's only one party, and you know this because right, that's correct. You know this because they tinker with the domestic. The foreign policy never changes. So how come the foreign policy never changes if you have two parties, left and right? There's only one party in America. They're neoliberal elites. That's who control America.
But I think the foreign policy is going
Never
to
changes.
I think it might change in some aspects of it. When looking at in relation to the Middle East, basically.
All right, George Bush had so many wars going. Which one did Obama stop? Because he disagreed with it, being the opposite side. Didn't actually increase it. Which ones are those that Trump stopped? None. Is that foreign policy doesn't change.
I think the foreign policy. I think the foreign policies. I think it kind of changed in relation to.
Tell me when.
You know, when Ben Ali when he got kicked out of Tunisia.
Sorry?
The Arab Spring.
Arab Spring.
Yes. When the Arab Spring, okay, he forced him to, you know, make some kind of make adjustments to the foreign policies, because the people that he, you know, like when he counted on were ousted. Were ousted.
AFRICOM, did you say?
No. I mean the presidents were ousted.
Yeah.
Yes. But now, what's interesting is, okay, you know, I think somewhere down the road, they got a religious, you know, government, something like that, that are in Tunisia now. And they're trying to do it in Egypt as well. Tunisia and Egypt, they're trying to put a more religious, less secular, but more religious figure in the presidency.
Well,
Yes. So basically, that itself I think would make some more adjustments for the Obama administration in regards to challenges, to adjust, the status quo of those countries. When you look at Tunisia and all that, it wasn't very, I think you weren't allowed to wear, women weren't allowed to wear hijab in certain public places, or something like that.
So how come in Saudi Arabia you didn't have the Arab Spring and they're more less kind to the people government? Saudi Arabia treats their people worse than any other country out there.
Yes.
How come there wasn't any change here? No Arab Spring.
I think the reason why
America wouldn't have pushed for that?
Yes, but I think the reason why there was no changes is because I think America depends on Saudi Arabia with number one, counter-terrorism. Number two, oil.
No.
Yes.
He's right. He said before. He's just on that side.
Yes.
Because
I'm maintaining.
No. Because Saudi Arabia. What gives Saudi Arabia so much power?
Yes.
Look at that. They just killed this guy who writes for the Washington Post. It's because Saudi Arabia in 1973 agreed with America to support America's fiat currency, that they would sell oil in dollars. Petrodollar was born. America came off the gold standard then. Saudi Arabia is the one that gives America the power to to create so much money out of thin air. So that's what gives Saudi Arabia the power.
I think Saudi Arabia, the reason why it's in the reason why they're in that status is because number one, I think that they had to trade, regional, Arab neighbors, and number two, they had to basically, for instance, I think Saudi Arabia, they abandoned their position in regards to, Israel and Palestine conflict.
Any interesting talk?
They basically, the reason why they're in their position, they sold out.
Saudi Arabia sold out?
Yeah, sold out the Arab, the Arab government system in terms of different countries. Related to the Israel Palestine conflict
It's a good thing you stay away.
and Bahrain.
I say hi
I'm
to
not sure what you're saying, sorry.
The reason why Saudi Arabia is in the position it's in now.
It's because of America. I've told you, because they're greed.
Yes.
As leader of OPEC, to sell oil in dollars. America didn't produce oil, America bought oil. Why wouldn't it be sold in dollars? Why dollars?
Because Saudi Arabia, like many other countries, they want to preserve, the foreign interests, like foreign Western interests in the region.
Don't have to do that. You've got oil that all the countries want. You need OPEC. There's interest there.
The reason why Saudi Arabia is in Bahrain now is because they want to preserve, what is left.
I'm good. This is geopolitics. I'll get a bit more educated for geopolitics for another day.
Yeah.
I'll see you guys later.
Basically, I think personally, the reason why they're in Bahrain is to preserve, the interests, like we as British people. Okay.
Can you stand there, bro? Because you say so of good sense. I just want to pick you up. Back in a second.
The reason why Saudi Arabia is in Bahrain is trying to preserve the Western interests.
You know what? Saudi Arabia is in Bahrain.
Yes.
Because Bahrain is a Shia country
Yes.
with a Sunni government.
That is true.
So
That is
they want to,
absolutely
and
true.
they want to maintain
They
as
also-
many
yes.
Sunni leaders in the area.
Yes.
Because they believe Iran is trying to get as many Shia leaders.
Yeah,
in there.
not only that, okay, Saudi Arabia actually cracked down on their own citizens who describe themselves as Shia on the eastern region of the country, of Saudi Arabia. So I think basically I think Saudi Arabia is a country, okay, that it discriminates people, okay. I don't know institutionally, but when you look from a social point of view, it discriminates people based on nationality.
Yeah.
I think
But what I mean, why does Saudi Arabia get away with so much?
because it can,
Because America supports them, because they support America. We will sell oil in dollars, the OPEC, leaders of OPEC, and protect you, and America will protect the military. So they can get away with that.
Yes, but we should be, British America, we should be, okay, an American, we should be inside Saudi Arabia instead of Iran. Because think about it, the hijackers, the 9/11 hijackers, were, you know, Saudi citizens.
They weren't.
They were Saudi citizens. They were. Most of them were.
What you're saying is 19 hijackers, 15 were Saudi Arabians. The leader, Osama bin Laden, no, Saudi Arabian. Osama bin Laden, Saudi Arabian. But I don't believe that's what happened.
Yeah, no, but even if that was the case, okay, I expect, okay, this country, because like, you know, Tony Blair, okay, he was such a, you know, he was literally licking George Bush, you know. So I expected, okay, you know, we go to Saudi Arabia with that. But however, I think basically, if it did happen, and I think opposition can be far more greater in terms of, you know, here at home, okay, in relation to the Muslim community. Because Saudi Arabia, you know, is home to Mecca and Medina. And there are places that many Muslims hold dearly to. And I think that this opposition will be far more greater than than opposition in who are against the war in Iraq.
In Iraq?
Yes. So had it been Saudi Arabia, I think opposition would be far more greater.
You said there's so much behind this, right?
I think had it been Saudi Arabia that we were invading, had it been Saudi Arabia invading, and we believe that, you know, certain elements in the Saudi
But you see, you're correct in what you said. Well, just talk about it. Saudi Arabia has got America where they want it. America is not worth anything. The dollar is not worth anything. By having the dollar backed by petrol, it allows America to print. If you imagine Zimbabwe printing their currency, inflation skyrockets. Venezuela more recently. Yes, America is printing at 10 times that rate, yet they don't have the inflation. The reason is to export the inflation. The way they export inflation is that all commodities and oil are sold in dollars. So all the countries around the world have got to keep those.
The high inflation leads to unemployment. And
yeah, but they'll control that by exporting the inflation.
And because I think most of the people, and then they're facing, you know, structural unemployment in terms of, you know, having mismatched skills. Yeah, because I don't think the fiscal policy is not going to work in those type of countries.
In which countries?
In those certain countries like Venezuela and all that.
No,
because
the
inflation rate is
I'm talking about the fact that these countries do print money. I mean, America has quantitative easing, as well as they print the dollar without it being backed by anything at all. They create money out of debt. So the time of money, you want to borrow $1 million, just print it. Now it's secured on whatever you borrowed it against. So it's created out of debt. There's no backing, there's no gold or anything beyond the currency.
No, my first year at university, okay, which was a couple months ago.
Your first what?
My first year at university, which was a couple months ago. There were two economists, and they believed, you know, how to solve, economic hardships. And I think one was from Hungary, I think one from Germany, and I forgot their names. There were two.
I wouldn't know them anyway, so the name's not relevant.
There were two. One believed in quantitative easing, another one said that quantitative easing won't help to ease, you know, the economic costs. Because, you know,
but some countries treat quantitative easing differently. For instance, in Japan, they gave the money to the people to actually spend to stimulate the economy. Wait a minute,
it's a small population.
Sorry? I said they treat it differently. Some people give it to the people, just give it to them. They will then spend it to stimulate the economy. Others give it to the corporations. It's the banks and the corporations that get the money, not the people. So, and sometimes they don't lend the money that they should be lending to stimulate the economy. They use it to buy back shares, which is what's happening in America more. That's sort of cheap money. Money is very cheap at the moment. Some places have zero interest. In fact, a couple of years ago, they were talking about you'd have to pay the bank to look after your money because there's no. And these people that use this cheap money to buy their shares, so their share price rise.
I think when you talk about shares and all that, you need to take into account, you know, probability ratio of the company.
Of what?
You take into account the probability ratios of the company, security ratio of the company.
Wait a minute, I wasn't talking about everything about.
From an investor's point of view, he has to take in all those into consideration.
If you can borrow money at pretty much zero interest,
yes,
and you buy back your shares, so the price goes up.
Yes, it's a buy. It's a buyback. Shares, yeah, it increases the price.
So I'm saying a lot of companies,
the earnings per share increases.
Yes. Yeah, but it's not real. They've just borrowed because money is cheap. They could not do it at a time when money was say 5% interest. You see, I mean, we might have to pay 2 or 3, 4%, but the banks aren't paying that. It's 0.25% or something, the interbank rates. But that's not what I said.
By the way, do you know the toilets this way?
Toilets?
Yeah.
The nearest one is sort of like pretty much that direction there. 20 pence.
Huh?
20 pence. Oh, McDonald's across the road through the Westminster. The McDonald's is just right across by the space. So when you cross the road, you'll see the McDonald's.
I can't go anyway because it's good to
Cheers. But the McDonald's is that's there. You might be a queue there, and it's 20 pence to go there as well.
They actually charge.
Huh?
They actually charge.
There's nobody there. There's a machine. You got to pay 20 pence for the gate to open. But the McDonald's is probably cleaner, more comfortable.
And then a coffee shop. Coffee shop.
There is a coffee shop across there.
Do they have a toilet there?
I don't know. But people here normally go to McDonald's. Again, the coffee shop might have a little thing that says people are queuing at McDonald's.
Yeah.
And it's clean.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Thank you. They're cleaning it around. All right, cheers. Take care.
Come take over everything from your belly.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Your mother bringing a guy.
My mother's married to my dad, so stick with the daughter.
If you lived in the time of Muhammad,
Okay.
and they said there's this man,
Yep.
I want to have a temporary contract with him for 3 days.
Yep.
Would you be happy with that?
3 days? I mean,
You see?
no,
You see?
stop.
Why does everyone have to think
you're
about
not
it?
listening. You're not
My
listening.
answer was the same.
No, you're not.
Yeah, but-
No. Why
Your
are
answer
you
should
You're
be
not paying
exact.
attention. I'll tell you
Say
why.
yes or no.
Why
Yeah.
do you have to think about it?
You gave a
I'll tell you why.
long-winded conversation.
I'll tell you why.
I want to ask you the simple
I'll tell you
question,
why.
and then we think
I'll
about it.
tell